So let's start at the very beginning. Somebody becomes aware of a crime that either happened to them or somebody they know. Do you call 911? Do you email somebody? Do I have to figure out, well, what county am I in? Do I have to find out the Bronx County? What's the first thing that you should be doing?
So just to answer the question about who do you call. So if you call 911, you don't need to know which jurisdiction you're in, which county you're in. That call is going to go directly to whatever operator is. It's going to happen automatically. So you don't need to worry about Googling which number to call if you call 911. But there is a difference between crimes that have just taken place or are currently taking place versus crimes that might have happened sometime in the past. So if a crime is happening in that moment or has just happened, it's easier to call 911 because there are things for the police to do investigatory on scene, or perhaps even come during the commission of the crime and stop it and arrest the person that's committing the crime. If something has happened weeks in the past or months in the past, you can go down to your local precinct. You don't need to call 911. You can just go directly to the precinct and explain to them that a crime has happened to you and that you'd like to make a report.
You don't need an appointment for that. You walk up to a desk in your local precinct and say, I want to report a crime.
Yes, especially in New York City, which is where my experience is, if you walk down to the precinct and you say that I'm a victim of a crime, they will have a detective or an officer sit with you and fill out the paperwork, take the initial investigatory steps and get the process started of doing the investigation.
I assume that that's much scarier to walk into a precinct. When you walk into a precinct, I'm just curious, in your experience, what % of your reports are coming from like walk-ins?
I would say it's maybe 20% or so. Approximately or so.
Is that what 911, if you call 911 about a past crime from several weeks or months ago, are they going to tell you to walk into the precinct and do it this way?
No, they will send an officer to your home, at least in the Bronx. They will. I don't want to speak for Chicago or whatever, but they will send an officer to your home. But if they know that the event took place a long time ago, it won't come as immediately because they know it's not an ongoing emergency. So it might take longer than if you call up and you say there's a man or a woman in my home that's threatening me. They will send somebody, a top priority, to come by. Gotcha.
And this might take a little bit longer. So You walk in and you're going to file a report. What are the basic information that a report begins with?
What happened to you? They will ask you questions about how do you know this person? Well, first they'll ask you about who you are. They're going to want to take your contact information so that way they know how to contact you. Then they're going to ask you about what happened to you. They're going to ask you follow-up questions and ever increasing more detail so they can determine or get an expansive understanding of the story.
And who's asking these questions? It's a police officer? It's the person who...
So it depends on the crime. If you are walking down the street and somebody punches you, a patrol officer is going to come. You know, somebody with the Navy uniform, with the sirens and all that. They're going to come down and take that information. If you're in the precinct and you say, I'm the victim of a domestic violence crime, there are domestic violence officers trained to talk to you. If you're the victim of a sex crime, there are trained detectives or other officers that will talk to you about those issues. So depends on the crime exactly who's going to end up talking to you. And these things are fluid, obviously, depending upon how much crime there happens to be during that day and who's available. But generally speaking, in these kinds of more sensitive crimes, there are people who are trained and experienced who know exactly how to talk and what to ask and what details they need to get their investigation started.
So let's pause for a second and talk about the training. What exactly did your training include? Again, are you in the picture yet? At this point, I'm coming in. I either walk in, I call 911, I say a crime has happened, and now I'm talking to an officer who's either the blue uniform, or what do you guys call them? Do they have like a name? Like officers in blue.
Police officer, patrol officers.
Patrol officer,
boys in blue, all that stuff.
Boys in blue, or a detective.
Right.
At what point are you getting involved? You are an ADA, which is an acronym for an assistant district attorney. Where are you in all this? You're in the back room. You're smoking a cigarette underneath one of those lights, like doing the...
So actually, this is where law and order can be very helpful in understanding the process, because there are these two groups that are part of the law enforcement criminal justice
And
sphere.
let me just say, it's not just law and order. You're specifically in law and order, SVU.
That is the closest approximation, but that's also far more dramatic than real life.
So tell me, why is it helpful?
So it's helpful in understanding what these two equally but separately important groups or whatever it is. So the police do all the upfront investigatory work generally. When you go down to the precinct, you're not talking to an assistant district attorney. You're talking to a police officer or a detective, somebody from the police department. Those officers conduct the investigation and determine whether there's enough probable cause to make an arrest on an accused person. Only following an arrest, generally speaking, is then the case passed off to an assistant district attorney to prosecute the case in the courtroom then. I say generally speaking because in the special victims world, sometimes ADAs are brought in a little bit earlier to help with the process, because what we don't want are for survivors to have to repeat their story dozens of times to different strangers. So we'd rather have people come in earlier to help with the investigation that the police department usually conducts. That way the survivor is familiar with the person who's ultimately going to be prosecuting the case. So in our world, a lot of times we do combined rape investigations. And I know that in the child abuse division, those ADAs are brought in very early on in order to help with interviewing the child and speaking with them. So that way they get a familiarity up front with the ADA.